Welcome to Hoots, Cambridgeshire Libraries podcast. I'm Rosie, a member of the library development team. In this episode, we're talking to Alison Bruce, creator of the Gary Goodhue series set in and around Cambridge. Hi, Alison. Thank you so much for agreeing to chat to me today. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Rosie. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, it's always good to talk to authors. We've been starved, absolutely starved. I've done everything I possibly could to keep the contact going with everyone in my contacts list. So what I'd love to talk to you about today, for our listeners' benefit, is obviously I'm going to start with, the first surprising thing people might not know is you actually were awarded a first an honours degree in crime and investigation at Anglia Ruskin. Now, we will come back to that later, but that is dedication to the cause, I feel, and we will return and unpack that a bit. But I mean, the first thing I would always, before I found that out, I would always have talked to you about Gary Goodhue. Your character, Gary. He is intriguing. I find him intriguing, very damaged, I think. So what motivated you when you were creating him? Where did he come from?
He sort of turned up by accident, and I think a lot of writers' best ideas, on the face of it, you would say they're accidents, but they actually come from your subconscious somewhere. And he came out of a conversation I had with somebody who knew I was writing a book, and he kept saying to me, I'd bump into him every sort of 6 months ago or so, and he would say, "Have you finished that book yet?" And I'd go, no, not yet. And eventually he said to me, "So could I be a character in your book?" And I thought, well, why not, really? And he said he wanted to be younger and better looking. And it was from that seed that Gary was born. And I needed a detective or a police officer of some description to answer the telephone in what became book 3, The Calling, because Marlowe, one of the main characters in the book, was making anonymous calls to the police. And up to that point, I hadn't planned to write a book that was a police procedural. It was really a sort of psychological thriller I set out to write. And so I had this policeman answering the phone, and then a bit later on, I needed a police officer again. I thought, he was nice to write about. And it went on like this until I reached the end of the book, and his character had grown and grown, really by sort of by feel. I would write a chapter and I would sense what sort of character that was coming through. I'll make it sound like a seance now, but so I would sense what sort of character was coming through, and his role grew and grew until I reached the end of the book, and it was leaving him behind that was really upsetting me. And it was at that point I realised that I had a character that I wanted to get to know better myself, and I had a strong feeling by then about what sort of person he was, and how he was motivated and how he viewed Cambridge and those kind of things. But I really got to know him as I was writing about him.
So what had you actually started out to write before he grew into it then?
Well, the book was, The Calling is about a character called Marlowe that you meet, and she's really herself quite a damaged character. She's been in a very toxic relationship, and she's split up with her boyfriend. She's self-harming. She's on the edge of a breakdown, and she bumps into him one day, and it's quite a sort of chance encounter. She walks into a shop as he comes out, and they cross paths. But she's so traumatized by the relationship that this shakes her up. And to kind of take control of the situation, she starts to watch him the whole time. She always knows where he is. And when there are a series of murders occurring, she starts to phone the police anonymously, saying that if he is stopped, then the killings will stop. And the police don't know whether the perpetrators are male or a female, or more than one person working together. So the book is a kind of whodunit. There's not a massive cast of suspects. So it was this more of a psychological thriller from her point of view. And then as it went on, I needed to have a small police involvement, and then gradually that grew, so it became more of a police procedural than I'd intended.
Because it's interesting, isn't it? Because if you start with that one, but then you've got your preceding titles, which is, I always like a backstory. But did you realise quite quickly you were going to go back and sort of start again almost?
I sent the book to an agent, not the agent I'm with, a different agent at the time. And he said, look, I can sell the book as it is, but if you want to make it part of a series, then we should go back and find out how Gary has developed the relationships with other people in the team, why he gets on with the ones that he gets on with, or why he's, got friction with some of the others. Also, to start with a book that's more like a standard murder mystery, where you've got a cast of characters, a cast of suspects, I suppose, and the solution is revealed really close to the end. And he said the third thing is really to strongly set the book in Cambridge, because quite a lot happens outside Cambridge. And he said if Cambridge is a really good location, so to introduce it very strongly in the first book would be beneficial. And of course, the first book, Cambridge Blue, it's on the front cover that it's Cambridge, and from there on out, Cambridge is really important to the series. So it was all very good advice. The reason I didn't actually ultimately stay with him is that he was very keen for me to change Goodhue as a character and make him more sort of alpha male Jack Reacher like. And I felt that this wasn't really Cambridge. I wasn't getting the ex-military vigilante vibe in Parker's Piece. So that wasn't going to work for me. And I am very flexible when it comes to feedback and ideas, but there are a few things that are lines that I wouldn't want to cross, and that was one of them. I had quite a firm idea of who Goodhue was and what he was about by that point, to the point where the book would have gone unpublished rather than for it not to be Goodhue.
No, I mean, that sort of thing is done elsewhere, and it's done very well by other people. Why take the unique sort of selling point? It just wouldn't fit with Cambridge, would it? Really?
I don't think so. And I must admit that Gary is the sort of character I think you grow towards over a period of time, because who he is isn't all sort of laid out from the first moment. You have to get to know him to understand the way he ticks and understand, he's quite quiet and he's a bit of a thinker, but when it comes to the crunch, he will act and go that extra mile. And to see somebody as they are in a normal situation and as they are under pressure and what they do when it comes to the crunch, I think is an important part of his personality and an important part of what makes the books the way they are.
Yeah, what I like is his world is really quite small. And he's comfortable with it being that small, but it really showcases Cambridge, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And Cambridge when I was first writing The Calling, I didn't live in Cambridge. So when I moved up here, it made sense to relocate the draft that I had somewhere local. So I had to look round at the available locations, and I live in one of the villages. So it's not far for me to get to, say, Bury St Edmunds or Ely or Newmarket. And but Cambridge seemed the perfect backdrop to it all. And I was told by this same agent, actually, he said, the American market is really important. The Americans only know 4 places in the United Kingdom: London, Scotland, Oxford and Cambridge. So he said, you've chosen well there. But the thing I love about Cambridge, actually, is that you're never done with researching it. It's got so many facets. And, it's at the cutting edge of technology, as well as being incredibly historic. It attracts people from all over the world. I think most people, wherever they are in the world, there's only a few degrees of separation between them and either having visited Cambridge or knowing somebody who has had a personal relationship with the place. And I think that makes it also very important that I'm reflecting a real Cambridge rather than a fictionalized Cambridge in the books. And I always like it when local people read the books and they either say, I've walked past such and such every day and never noticed that before, or I know that's true because I grew up in that street. And, those sort of things that tell me I got the local research right. And because Gary loves the place so much, they're really important part of Gary's, an extension, I suppose, of Gary's personality.
Yeah, and there's nothing probably irritates some readers more than if there's just a little detail. Think, well, I'm sure that's not right. I was reading something set locally, and there is a bicycle ride in this particular novel where it only takes 12 minutes on a bike from March to Wisbech. I thought that's impressive. I might have to go back and check whether it was a motorbike or a pedal bike, but I do think it was a push bike. And it's just silly little things. If people live and know the background and the setting, and it shouldn't be an issue. But for some people, that's the thing they hone in on, isn't it?
It is, but I think if you're setting somewhere, if you're setting a book somewhere that's a real place, you've kind of made an unspoken contract with your reader that you're representing that place. So I think you have to be very careful about where you decide to draw the line between fact and fiction. In my first book, I did rename one street, and I only did that because I was murdering somebody and I thought it might be bad form to do it in the real street. And since then, I've thought, no, I'm doing too many murders to make up that many street names. So streets are just the way they are, and also places are the way they are on the day that I've written that chapter. I go out, I make my notes, I'm writing what I see. I might add in a character or, if it's convenient, a particular poster or piece of signage, but the backdrop is exactly what I've seen on that day. And I think that's the way I've chosen to do it. And that's important to me to carry on with that.
And it's very effective because I can't remember which title I was reading. I've read them all, devoured them. And I was reading one night and you'd set a murder on a corner of a street in Cambridge, and I'd been reading it the night before. The next day I was actually in Cambridge for work, and I walked around that corner and I had a moment.
Was that Trinity Street, the corner of Trinity Street and Rose Crescent?
It was.
Yeah.
And I walked around that corner and I stopped and I thought, no, that was a book. That didn't happen. That was a book. But part of my head was saying, that's where she was. And
that's really good. That particular murder victim was bumped off at about 1 a.m. So I went down there at about 1 a.m. Because I wanted to see which shops had the lights on, where light was being cast across the pavements, particularly, in the nighttime, the light and dark things, really important. And on that corner, when you look up, there's these, I don't know if they're sort of gargoyle things. I don't know if they're flying buttresses or whatever they are. When you look up and they're animals leaping off the side of the building, look a bit like a puma or something like that. And above it, the clouds were moving quite quickly, and it gave the effect of these things leaping through the air because they were moving against the clouds. And so I was there, and I was getting to the point, and it was creepy because it was completely deserted, and things take on a different personality in the middle of the night. And I'd walked over Magdalen Bridge, and I got up to the round church, and I turned up Trinity Street, and my character could hear footsteps running in the distance, which was the person who was going to catch up with her on the corner of Rose Crescent and do the deed. And as I'm making these notes, I can hear footsteps running in the distance. So I decided to go home quite quickly. But, hopefully it was enough to capture the atmosphere and little things. Yes, you can look at a location on Google Earth, which can be handy, especially if you're thinking, is there a footpath between there and there? And you can spot things sometimes you can't see, in the flesh. But I went down there that night, and there are little metal bollards in the street, and they're painted black and they're unlit. So at 1 a.m, the first thing I did was sort of run into one of these metal bollards. And so she does the same thing, because it's stupid, isn't it? Black bollards in an unlit street.
Very dangerous.
And but it does. Even if people don't notice the detail, I think they subconsciously do, and then they walk down there, and it's exactly what they've seen on the page. And it hopefully does give that sense of realism.
Absolutely. And it sort of leads me on to something I wanted to ask you about is, I really think if you don't have one, you should have a walking tour of your locations in Cambridge, because, as you say, you can tie in Google Earth, you can do all sorts, you can do augmented reality, you can do virtual reality, you can do all sorts of things. But just a literary walk would be fabulous, wouldn't it?
Well, there's a lady called Barbara, and she's from Downham Market, and she brought the Downham Market reading group and the Downham Market book group and did a book walk for Cambridge Blue and then for the next 2 books. And they did work really well. It's very interesting when you see people who've got your book in front of them and they're looking at it and they're going, oh, this is the corner where Good Hugh stood, and you have just in this instant of you saying that, and I'm thinking, well, maybe I should do that and video it, and so that it was there on YouTube or something. I mean, the problem is the books are written as I saw it at the time, and some of the things have gone, some of the things have been demolished. Bradwell's Court, for example, was there when I wrote that, has since gone, and The Flying Pig, of course, which features quite heavily in the 3rd book. But perhaps I should do this and then capture these things for the future, because Cambridge is constantly changing.
It is, but I'm sure Cambridgeshire Archives might be able to help out.
Quite possibly.
You never know. But yeah, I think it's well, I'm not. You've probably got lots of other things to do, Alison, but it would be, as a fan and for readers, it would be fascinating. It really would be good. It would bring a whole new sort of view to it, wouldn't it? So I'm very conscious we're sort of getting through time, and I've got loads of questions, and we've happily covered lots of them. But what I want to return to is what motivated you to go and do your degree? Was it the writing, or was it another motivation altogether?
No, it was the writing. I enjoy doing research, and the research comes in many shapes and forms. Some of it is walking around Cambridge and choosing the right street or the right house to set a new book in, and around. And obviously I have to do research around whatever my characters do for a profession, and policing as well. But one of the things I've always been most interested in is any of the research that centres around pathology and forensics, those kind of things. And I was at Anglia Ruskin as a Royal Literary Fund Fellow, which was they employ professional writers to spend a couple of days a week in university to help students with their academic writing. And I had a student that came in to see me, and of course I asked her which course she was doing, and she said that she was doing this Crime and Investigative Studies course, and she'd just been shooting a watermelon to see how bullets, impacted a surface, and I thought, what is this course? And I looked it up as soon as she'd left the office. And whereas before, when I thought of doing a degree, I thought of doing it in order to get the qualification. This degree, I looked through and I thought, oh, I want to learn about that. I want to learn about that. So I went to do the course to better inform my writing, so that I wasn't always going to other people for research, to really gain more knowledge in areas that fascinated me anyway. And we did subjects like some of the crime scene investigation. So we suit up and lift foot marks, shoe marks, finger marks, trace evidence, swabbing for blood stains, and so on and so forth. We did investigations into fire, into mass fatality incidents, into different types of major crime, all these kind of things. And it was just, I found it totally enjoyable and fascinating from end to end. But it has definitely added to my crime writing. It's given me lots of new ideas and a different angle on things, I suppose.
Yeah, with that, sort of bearing that in mind, would that have changed any of your earlier books, do you think, knowing now what you know?
I think what would change if I went back over some of my earlier books is there are cases where investigative techniques have advanced in the time since I wrote the books. There was one thing that I brought into one of the books, which was identifying somebody based on DNA recovered from vomit. And at the time, I know, I can't help myself. At the time, I would just say that I think you would agree, the books are not overly violent or overly gory. I just have the odd page or two here and there where I do something in detail. And at the time, I contacted the police forensic laboratories and asked them whether this was possible. And this is when I was researching the book, and they sort of said, well, theoretically. And then by the time the book came out, I asked the same question again. They were like, yeah, we can do that, no problem, because that's how technology's moved on. And there was a real life case in the papers a few weeks ago where somebody has been identified for the rape and murder of somebody in America, and they had the DNA sample, but it was so small they'd never been able to get a reading, and they finally managed it, and it was from 15 individual cells that they did it from. So all the time, technology and techniques are advancing. So I think you always have to accept that when you're reading any crime novel, that's the bit where you have to sort of suspend disbelief. You can't sort of go, well, there's a technique to do that, because that might not have existed 2 years ago when it was written. So it's some of those things. But overall, I'm pretty happy to. I tend to take the view, once a book's written, it's done, it's gone out there in the world, and I just look forward all the time. So I prefer to remain happy about everything I've written, and then look towards the next one.
Quite rightly. And then I did read on your website that you're actually now using that degree and you're working with the police. Is that right?
Yes, I am. I'm working at Anglia Ruskin, and the Anglia Ruskin are delivering a policing degree programme for, they're involved in a consortium of universities delivering it for the Metropolitan Police, but then also for Cambridgeshire, Bedfordshire, Hertfordshire, Kent, Essex, Norfolk and Suffolk. So I'm working on that project, which is really interesting.
Yes, it will be. I mean, look where you've come to.
I know. Life's full of little twists and turns, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, who would have thought when you started out with that first book that you would be doing this now? I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it? So on that strand, are you working on anything at the moment, Alison?
Yes, it's called Because She Looked Away, and it's the first in a series of 4 featuring a new detective, and her name's Ronnie, and she's, rather than being like Gary, who loves Cambridge, she's reluctantly moved to Cambridge and can't see the appeal of it really, and she's taken over this slightly failing, I suppose, missing persons team, and the first case is the body of a missing teenage girl who's discovered 4 years after she's disappeared, buried in her now deceased mum's back garden. That's where I am with it.
Excellent. And I mean, your last 2 were standalones, and have you been tempted to do sort of extrapolate any more from either one of those?
I set out to make The Moment Before Impact the first in a series, actually. And then my publisher was really keen on me to write a new police-based series based in Cambridge with a female protagonist. So that's the route I've gone down. I did become very fond of several of the characters in The Moment Before Impact, and I feel that they've got more one day.
I would agree with you. I think I probably said that to you a while ago. I think there is a story there I want to hear. I
was very pleased with that book, actually. It's my favourite book cover, incidentally. I love the cover of it. But I spent a long time actually plotting that book, and it was because it was quite, although it's I don't think it reads as a particularly complicated book, it was quite complicated to plot, because I had to make sure that you have to be careful when you give any characters a main role, that you're potentially making the reader invest in them, and then it can be really disappointing if they turn out to be the bad guy in the piece, and then to make somebody else the main character could indicate that you don't have to worry about them, they're not a suspect. So to keep the sort of intrigue going, I had to think about it from several different ways, and I had to introduce quite a lot of characters quite quickly. So I had to think about different techniques for doing that, because it's really frustrating if the readers if the reader's reading and flicking backwards and forwards and going, who was that and why are they there? And I don't even remember who that person was. That's no good. So I had to employ all these devious methods to make it appear like a smooth delivery of the plot to the reader while I was frantically swimming underneath, tucking everything in to the right place, if that makes sense.
It was beautifully tucked into the right place. I mean, I got the iPad out and I was following the characters around the streets of Cambridge.
Oh, okay, that's nice.
It's obviously a thing with me. We'll not go there. But yes, it was fascinating because I thought, I know these street names. Oh, that's where they live. That's where they've gone to. So yeah, it was I really enjoyed that one. It was if I said it was a comfortable read, I mean, I'm very comfortable with how you write it. I know I can trust you to get me to the end and it's going to be good. Which
thank you.
I can't pay any higher accolade than that, really. And I'm going to sort of start rounding it off. And I'm going to ask you a question. And I seem to ask most people this, and you're not allowed to answer the one I'm working on now. So basically, out of all the books, I think you might have already answered this, but do you have one book that really, really you have a very deep-rooted feeling for?
I have 3. I'm not allowed to say 3, am I?
I could stretch it. It's not Desert Island Discs, shall we?
The second Goodhue book, The Siren, is based around Mill Road Cemetery, and I do pop back there in the moment before Impact, actually. I really liked the way the plot came together in that book. I thought it was a good way to get to know Gary. And that's the first time one of the other main characters is introduced, Sue. So I'm really very fond of that book. The Backs, which was the 5th one in the series. Sometimes things fall into place in a very satisfying way, and I don't think that necessarily reads any better or any worse than any of the others, but to me it was a really satisfying one to write. And then The Moment Before Impact, which I think is technically the best one I've written. If I was to analyse it technique wise, I think then.
Yeah, from a writer's perspective, yeah. Yes. I mean, I just enjoy them all equally because I'm just happy to be in that world, really. I'm, relatively uncritical eye. But yes, I just think what you've created really is amazing. And the fact that you've created it in and around Cambridge, and we will get you into Cambridge Central Library to film that shot where she's desperate for a book.
Yes, no, I was obviously, by the time the book came out, it was hard to go anywhere, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
But I did really have a clear picture of her just desperate to get her hands on this book and being in there. And I love writing about Cambridge. I think it's a great backdrop, and there are lots of, even down to individual buildings, individual window frames and roof lines and all kinds of things that I find, like little gems that I can suddenly come across in the middle of the city. I absolutely love it. But I do miss Gary, and I miss Celia and Nikki as well.
And the thing is, that's all in your gift. Whether if you miss them enough, whether you want to give them another outing, that's entirely in your power, really, isn't it?
I guess so. I do have 2 more books planned for Gary.
Yeah. Yes. Gary's grandmother. She's coming into play at any point.
I love Gary's grandmother.
I do too. I don't know. You see, I don't know whether I don't need to know any more about her and she's just a woman of mystery, or whether I'm desperate to know her backstory. I can't decide.
Is it helpful if I tell you it's a really interesting backstory?
Well, that's torture, really, isn't it? So it's sort of helpful. Thank you, Alison.
There's murder and mayhem in there.
If you can just write that one for me, that would be lovely. I don't care what your publisher says, just write it for me, please.
Okay, I'll bear that in mind.
Thank you. Right, I have taken lots of your time, and that has been really, really interesting and very illuminating, Alison. So thank you, and carry on with your writing. And obviously, we can't wait to see the next series come out. Thank you very much. It's lovely. It's been a lovely way to spend my lunchtime. Thank you. Thank you for listening. You'll find Alison's audiobooks on our Borrow Box service, ebooks on our Libby service, and her books are in our libraries. You can listen to other episodes on Anchor FM, Spotify, and other podcast platforms. Book Hoots is produced by Cambridgeshire Libraries.